it's going to be good. Hey guys, welcome back to iNVision Prototypes. I'm Nick. So I'm just putting the final touches on this rear valance fascia panel, whatever you want to call this, so that we can install the internal structure. Once that's done, we get the brake light in, the third brake light, and finally create a bracket for this trunk latch, so when we bring the structure down, we can have it latch. If you're interested to see how this rear fascia panel was created, click that little card right there, and that'll take you to a video showing how we went about doing this panel. Let me get some clamps, get the welding machine out, so that we can take and tack this panel to the main body structure, not to here just yet. This will be mounted on screws temporarily, just so we can take and pull this off and later finish that area up. But we'll get this located, and then we'll go ahead and make the mount for the third brake light. We thought about mounting this light up in the rear deck area, but the angle of the rear deck and the angle of the light when the light sits level don't jive. So then we thought about up in the roof area, if we kind of put it up there somehow, and had a little protrusion, it looked kind of silly. So then we looked at this area through here, and the angle of this rear fascia, as well as the lens, match. So that's where it's going to go, in from behind. Let's get these pieces mounted and then move on to the light. Just need to make sure that our structure is wide enough to allow this light to go inside. And as you can see, that's where the light's going to sit, right there. Okay. We're sticking up about 1/4 inch just above this flange. So once it's welded, we'll take and kind of smooth that out and just bring them in line with each other. And we have to make sure that this pinch weld is nice and snug. We don't want the two panels sitting like this. We want them sandwiched together nice and tight. We're going to put a few little tacks along this bottom structure to this panel. And then later on, we'll take this off, prime everything, both sides of the surface, bring them together and final weld it. Funny bone. So that's coming in quite nicely all the way through there. Let's move this down so you guys can see. Coming in quite nice through that structural area there, as well as over here. Now, it's going to be a little bit tricky to bring this lower panel upward until we pull the outside fascia off. Then we'll be able to bring it up and final weld everything nice and snug. Now, you notice that when I clamped this top, it actually pulled the panel rearward. So what I'm going to do is put a little tack right there to the side panel. We created the side panels earlier. We're going to put a little tack there, and then we'll bring the top in and tack the top. There we go. Awkward. Let's test fit the brake light and make sure we can get it in. Like a glove. These two structural members, I tried to bring them as close as possible towards the center, so that the center is also supported, because we don't want this moving around either. So we just left enough room to sneak the light through, and then move it back and center it, and that's where it's going to be. All right. So I'm going to put two little tacks between the structure and that, a couple tacks on the ends, and then we'll put screws along the top. I don't want the tacks visible from inside the trunk structure. I want a nice clean seam all the way through. So this structural member, structural piece, has a little flange that returns rearward, and that's going to be clamped to the structure inside and welded after this is removed. Just kind of a looks good thing. Okay, that's looking really good right there. Now I have to remind myself not to weld into this panel because this is coming out. Let's get some screws in here. So this little protrusion here, the structure, that'll be trimmed down once it's all welded up. Good. So this flange was all checked with the structure before the trunk structure was pulled off. So we know it's consistent and it's good. You always have to double, triple, quadruple check everything to make sure. Because once it's welded, you don't want to be peeling and drilling welds out and peeling sheet metal off to correct something. It doesn't work out too well after that. All right, let's take a quick look. So there's a structural panel right there at the bottom. And those screws will come out later. We'll weld everything up. We need to take and install this light right in here, just like that. And this is going to be mounted to this piece here. And later on, we'll have a cosmetic cover that covers that hole up, because we don't want to be looking inside or have any weather come in to the trunk area. Now there's a little tack here that'll be cleaned up. It's quite easy to clean up, but I don't want any welds along this seam here nor over there. There's a flange on the inside, and that's where it's going to be welded, and then we'll just take and trim whatever we don't need off of this. There's a line right there, you can telltale sign, and that'll be cut off just about there. So that's what you're going to see inside the trunk. This latch, you have to bring it up. It sits up like that, and it can't be too high because you don't want to be bumping yourself every time you reach in and out of the trunk. Stay very good. And the same thing on that side. See how it comes through? Nice and clean. And we'll clean up that tack right there. Just kind of grind it down so we have a nice consistent seam all the way through. Yeah, there's a little light bulb that goes in here. And then to pull this out, you can't pull this out directly. You have to move it one way, kind of wiggle it out, just like that. So, next step, let's get this light mounted. Now we could take and drill a hole through both of these little vertical legs and just put a screw or fastener or whatever down into the structural flat piece that we have there. But that will weaken these tabs, and we don't want that to happen. And the other thing is, if this ever breaks and he goes to replace it, I don't want him to try drilling holes and try to, configure this the right way. So instead, we're going to create a saddle that sits up over top, and it's going to screw down on either side down to the structure, and that saddle, out of a piece of sheet metal, will hold this light in place. And that'll give us the ability to move this back and forth if we needed to adjust the depth up to the sheet metal here. If those holes happen to get drilled into the wrong spot or a little bit off, we might have a gap that just won't look right, and then we won't have the ability to adjust it unless we kind of elongate the holes, which will take more material off these legs, making it weaker. So that saddle will give us the adjustability that we need, as well as maintain the structural integrity and originality of the light. With that saddle, you don't want that saddle to be too high or too low to the point that it crushes and breaks these little tabs, because hey, it's only plastic. Now you might have thought I was crazy when I was saving all these little ribbons of sheet metal that I would cut off of panels, and this is exactly where you can use a piece of this, because it's perfect width to support those two little legs, and then when we reconfigure this shape into the shape of a saddle, it'll work perfectly to hold that light down. They are useful. So I noticed the width of this piece actually widens as it goes to the left side, your left side. And I want it consistent. So we're going to add 1/8 of an inch to this side and taper it down. I'm kidding. We're taking cut off 1/8 of an inch, and they'll give us more than enough support for this piece. If you want to practice and improve your welding abilities, you can try adding 1/8 of an inch of sheet metal to a panel. But it's a little bit quicker and easier just to cut this off. Oh, I'm not going to be saving that piece. Now I'm going to take the corners off of this. And we can go to the brake and bend this up. When I put this in the brake, I will be able to see this side, this line, and this line, but these will be on the wrong side when I go to bend up the legs the other way. So to transpose this mark over, I've shown you this before, we can use a center punch, just put a little dot there, and then that'll show up on this side, and we'll know where to bend the strip. Yeah, you really got to clean this corner up. It does get to me a bit. So we're going to take and bend up this line right here. Let's go 90 degrees. Yes, that's 90 degrees here. We want to make sure that we're not bending it on an angle that way or that way. Just double check the length. 3.5. Now, this is the tricky part. I may have messed up. You see, the leg extending downward, it kind of makes it difficult to get into here. Not a problem. Now, you might be thinking, is this piece strong enough? Well, like I mentioned before, it's only plastic. But if we needed to reinforce this piece, we could take and bend a little leg on one side as well as the other side and then tack the corners, and that'll give this little bracket a lot more strength. But in this case, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. 1 3/16. Let's make it a little bit tighter. See, when you do the fastener up, you don't want the fastener to crush the plastic because it's only plastic. Do a double check in case we have to back up. I grab an old tape measure. Okay, there we go. Now, in the event the piece is a little bit loose in here, after this is painted, we can take and put a little foam spacer in here, and that'll give it a bit of cushion. Eliminate any vibrations and hold that light in place. Okay, line up with a little dot we created earlier, and we are sitting at 1 3/16, and that's it. We have our little saddle. For heavy duty bending, we've got a lock right here that pinches that lower angle in place. We didn't need it for this because, well, it's light enough. So let's get this light in place. Let's get it centered, sitting where it needs to, and our little saddle. Making sure that everything lines up correctly. Now there is a tiny little bit of play between the plastic and our little bracket. Instead of a foam spacer, I'm thinking about something else here. Let's go to the tipping wheel. I'm going to create a small groove downward into this panel, or into this little horseshoe here. Saddle. Just tighten up the rollers and give it a bit of a squeeze. Now let's go back again. Okay, so as you can see, we have a little bit of a rib there. I want to take and flatten this out a little bit, make it level again, and then we can see how this fits. I'm going to open this up one more time. What I want to do is create a rib going the opposite way, and that'll level it out. Just like that. Nice and level. We'll stand our legs back up. Okay, so we can test fit this, see how it looks. It's fitting there quite well. And we have no more play between the light and the bracket that we just created. And it's nice and tight there against the skin, against the outside skin. So now we can get some screws into here and mount this little bracket in place. After these self-drilling, self-tapping screws are removed, we'll have a hole where that screw was, and then we'll take and weld a nut from the underside and install a fastener or a bolt so we can bring it down nice and snug. I'm not a huge fan of leaving screws behind like that. First, I'm going to pre-drill the bracket so we're not drilling through as much material. Now, after thinking about it for a second, I decided that we'll get this saddle mounted in place. Uh-oh, we've got a problem. So after drilling the holes out, we have a bit of a burr on the bottom, and it's rocking, so we have to take and make sure that the bottom is nice and flat, grind that up. Okay, so instead of taking the screw and trying to push down with the drill and moving that flange around, or having the chance of the screw drifting, what we're going to do is take and mark it out and then drill only the flange with a drill bit. And to mark it out, we're going to use a marker, and kind of indicate an area in blue. And then we'll take the scratch awl, and with that saddle mounted in place, we'll take and mark it through the blue marker, if you will, and that'll give us a nice indication where we have to drill. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see a scratch on sheet metal. Right there and right there. So we have our Sharpie marks. Mount this back into place, realign the light. Now we take the scratch awl, scratch through the Sharpie, and there we have a scratched off Sharpie, and there, and we know exactly where to put the screw. That's all we got to do. So take this out. Now that will be trimmed off and cleaned up afterwards. For now, I want to mark and locate there, the light. Okay, it's centered. Little bit of movement right there and there. Let's see what happens when we put the screws in. have a little bit of movement from side to side, and that's good. That'll give us a final alignment for that. And the other thing is, forward and back, we have a little bit of movement for that as well. But you can see that the light is loose. We're not crushing down on the plastic because, hey, it's only plastic. We'll take and put a foam sponge on the underside of that, and that'll give us a nice tension. We have about 1/8 of an inch, less than 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch space there. And that will tighten that up with the foam spacer. Now the light won't be green, obviously. Just protective tape on the front lens area, just so we don't scratch it up for now. But that's it. Next step is to take and create a bracket to mount this latch in place. We need this latch stiff enough so that it doesn't move around when the trunk comes down and latches onto it. And then the other thing we have to do is bend up a piece of rod that engages with the latch, and it gets bolted to the structure underneath there. Now this is a piece of hardened rod. You can't use soft rod because the latch will wear it out and it'll become sloppy afterwards. So we can't bend this hardened rod just the way it is, otherwise it'll break. So we'll have to pull the torches out, heat it up, and bring it around to where we need it. But first we'll mount the latch, then get the structure in place, and then we'll deal with this. We have to make sure the angle of approach when the trunk comes down approaches this latch correctly. If it comes in on an angle, this is extreme, it won't latch correctly and it won't operate correctly, it won't release properly. So we have to make sure that when that latch comes down, when that loop comes down that I showed you, that rod, it has to come in perpendicular to that latching mechanism. So I'm just looking at that right now, and I just have a self-drilling, self-tapping screw kind of holding it, kind of roughly where it needs to be, but we have to make this permanent. So looking to see what we can do to solidify things. Some old screws here. Take those out. Much better. And we should tap that down. Okay. To release this trunk lid, we won't have any keys on the outside. It'll be a nice smooth trunk lid. And in order to open it, you'll have a button on the inside of the car or on your key fob. And then in an emergency, in case your battery's dead, there is a cable provision that we'll have to hook up and put somewhere on the car that you won't know about, so that the owner can get into the car or into the trunk if their battery dies. I need to measure up a bracket, come up with a piece of paper template. First, probably would be a good idea. Of course, they couldn't put it on one plane, these fasteners. They had to mount it on 2 planes. So we'll make up a bracket that looks kind of like that. Their one hole is fixed, no slot. This side is slotted from side to side, and this one here is slotted up and down. So you have full adjustability of your latch in the event you need to make any adjustments later on to make sure everything closes correctly. All right, let's punch some holes in here. One, 2, and 3. And we'll transpose everything over to a piece of, let's call it 1/8 plate, and get this fabricated. So I wasn't able to find a piece of flat plate that kind of matched what we needed here, but I found this piece of box tubing, and it's been used as whatever, bracing, who knows what, but it'll work perfectly. It's got the corners nicely rounded, and we'll be able to overlay this over here, cut a piece out of this, and get this mounted into the car, and it'll give us tons of strength. If we had a flat plate, we'd have to turn the ends up a little bit to give us some more rigidity, because even though it is 1/8, there could be a little bit of flex. We don't want any flex. And let's get the plasma out and go play with some fire. Okay, so we're going to mark this out like that. We'll take and cut off about there, leaving a bit of a leg, and one right there. Good. So we'll cut through here first, and we'll make the end cuts. And while we're at it, we're going to take and prepare this piece for inside the trunk structure with the latch that hoop bolts onto. So I've got a plate I started preparing a little bit earlier. playing around with a few shapes to go with the shape of the trunk lid there, the beading that we created. So this is going to get mounted from the outside that the hoop bolts onto, or that gets welded to, and then this will bolt to the structure that's within the trunk structure, because we just can't screw this to the sheet metal. It's not going to remain strong for very long. It'll crack, or it's not the right way to do it. You need to have a backer in place that you bolt to, and that way will distribute the forces from latching the trunk over a wider area. Perfect. So there's our plate. Touch it up with the grinder a little bit. There's a bit of a burr there. And get it ready for drilling some holes. That's the right way to stop a grinder, by the way. You notice this leg is a little bit higher than the vise. I'm not grinding the vise. It's the last thing you want to do. Lift it up so that your piece is a little higher than the vise. Okay, so that's the first piece. We can punch these holes. And then the other thing we have to do is take and bend this. But while we're here, align everything. Okay, so that's all center marked. Boom, boom, boom. Now you can see I didn't use a Sharpie here. It's warm. Or you could call it heavy. Anyway, I didn't use a Sharpie, so you can I can't hold this for very long. You can hardly see the little center mark. I can feel it, but you can hardly see it. If I use a Sharpie or a die comb, kind of illuminated the area with that, then I could see that a lot better. All right, now this is the piece that goes inside the skin. Now, this is very close to where it rolls down for the back edge. And we don't have very much room for a leg there. So there's a very slight roll up. That's all we need. Here, I've left about a 1/4 inch, and that's sufficient for that. So we'll just take and cut that off. Fit just right. We'll take and align these two pieces together. So when I drill through this one, it'll also go through the bottom plate. Okay, so we got the bracket bent up, and let's fit it to the latch. And I'd say that's perfect right there. So get some nuts welded on the back side of this, some metric nuts, because everything else on this vehicle is metric. Want to keep it consistent, and then we'll get this tacked into place. Now, this is what takes the time, figuring all the brackets, all the hinges, all the latches. You know, shaping metal is one thing for a vehicle. It's all this other stuff that you have to take into account as well. You know, you can't drive a sheet metal shaped body mounted on a buck down the road. Okay, so we got the nuts welded on the back side, and these are just kind of like sacrificial used bolts that we kind of pull out of the bin. I'm going to put the original bolts back into the same spot here, the ones that came out of the latch. Those are all been bagged and tagged and stored away, but for now, this is going to work. And we're going to get this latch mounted into place. Okay, so as it turns out, this bottom bolt, which is pretty darn warm right now, even with the glove on, nope. See, warmed up the glove, that's it. With the nuts welded on, I have to drill out one spot here. Okay, so that's going to be it right there. The latch bracket located based on the old holes that we had. Now I'm going to go through and clamp this in place and tack it into the structure. Only tack it for now, because we may have to move it or adjust it when we start playing with the top lid. With that tacked in, now we can go ahead, get the structure in place, and start playing with that loop that comes in and engages with this latch. But that'll be for another day, so keep an eye out for trunk structure, latch mechanism. I'm not sure what the title is going to be. Keep an eye out for part 2, and we'll get into that whole alignment and fitment and latching of the trunk lid in that video. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like what you saw, please hit the like button. And if you're visiting our channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because it helps us grow. Don't forget to hit that little bell down there. Next time we have a video coming out, you'll know about it. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.